Okay, so one of our first elements that we're going to cover is lawn. So, lawn, there are a few things you know before we get started. First, there is different types of lawns. So, you can have lawns that are horizontal, you can have lawns that are vertical, diagonal, wavy, straight. My elementary students used to call this one the castle lawn, zigzags. You can have lawns that are broken or dotted. So you can have a wide variety of lawn. Now you can also have different types of lawn quality. Okay, so when I think about lawn quality, that's when I start to think about the different types of media I can use. Again, media is what supply you are using. So examples of that would be pencil, paint, marker, crayon, etc. Different types of media usually give you different quality. At the same time, you can also have different pressure with how soft or heavy the touch is. Okay, so we have pressure and then what media. Those are just my note taking for the day here. Okay, so if you start with line quality with a pencil, you can have light, sketchy lines. Like let's say you're drawing an eyeball, easiest um, thing to pop in my head here to draw would be an eyeball. So let's say you're going to keep it really sketchy because you want um, the ability to go back in and alter if you want to erase something or add something. So this is kind of a sketchy line quality. Now, if you are making a poster and you just want to be bold, okay, so you can have Sharpie or a permanent marker or just a regular marker. Okay, so there's bold line quality. So that kind of means that you have boom boom. It is what it is. Okay, then varying. I write that because so just the line's going to vary as it goes. This is really popular with calligraphy. These chisel tip markers, this is crazy art. Crayola even has an entire book about how they use these markers for calligraphy. You can start really thin and then get thicker as you go. So then you press down, you get that calligraphy feel. Okay, so that's my varying lines with a marker. Um, with a crown, unless you're pressing extremely hard, you're going to get sort of a gravelly, textured feel of a line. So if you wanted to make this more bold, you would have to obviously layer or use more pressure. Okay, so you have some different things you can do with a crayon. And then color pencil, which is one of my favorite tools to color with, um, because it's much like a pencil. You can get the really thin lines. You can turn it on its edge and lay it almost flat on the table and get really wide lines. I'm also going to suggest you don't sharpen them super pointy because little points always snap when you do this. But even if you wanted this thin line, you can still get it from a color pencil. Okay, so that's just some really quick line quality. Now, for your project, I'm asking you to draw a line landscape. You can choose. The paper can go landscape or portrait, either way, but you're going to think about parts of a landscape. So a landscape includes sky, ground, or sky, sea. Okay, it has sort of a two-part scenario happening. So I'm going to choose sky, land, and do mountains. I think I'm going to do it. Well, I'll keep it landscape so it's nice and fits into the camera. Um, so when you think about the division between land and sky, there's a line that runs across the page. Okay, this little line is called the horizon line. So if you were out sailing on a boat and there's this little bitty fuzzy line between sea and sky, it's called the horizon line. That's probably where you're going to hear it a lot, is when you're at the beach and you see those pictures of the sunsets or the sunrises where you can just see the sun peeking out over the horizon. That's your horizon line. All right, so from this, you're going to decide what you're going to put in your picture. So I've already kind of thought of, I'm going to do mountains. So I'm going to try to start. I may have to go back over my horizon some, because mine's not going to be totally straight here. And then put in some mountains. You can choose whether you want it to be daytime or nighttime, whichever you were sort of thinking. So then I'm going to go back in on my mountains and divide which side's going to get light and dark. You can do this a bunch of different ways. You don't have to choose mountains. You can choose hills. You can choose waves. The main thing I'm asking you guys to do is to think about using lines to fill in a landscape. Okay, so let me go back and erase my extra line. I'm showing you guys the horizon and the word horizon. Okay, and I'm going to go straight at this with a Sharpie. If you are super cautious and don't want to start with a Sharpie, you can start with a pencil first. But for your sake and for time's sake, I'm going to go right into this with a Sharpie. Okay, so going back to your line quality, the other thing, when we talk a little bit more about value next week, is that the closer you put your lines together, the darker that area is going to appear. So if you have your lines really spaced, this area is pretty light. Whereas if you have them really close together, this area is going to appear much darker. So then choose, just be aware when you're making your landscapes of that concept, because it'll look kind of funny if this side of the mountain's light on this mountain and the opposite on the next mountain up. Okay, so I'm going to do these two over here, and then I'll end up sharing my finished project with you guys on Google Classroom. So you're going to fill it with lines. You can choose different types of lines, like we talked about a second ago. You can keep with these sort of contoured lines where they just sort of follow the craggly shape of the mountain, or if you're doing waves, you can keep this shape of your waves. You have a lot of options. So I'm going to let this be the dark side of the mountain, and this side I'm going to come down and do more spaced out onward. Try to finish filling it in the bottom of the mountain here so that it looks consistently neat. Okay. So then this one's filled in now. I'll do the same thing down here. Usually these that I do really quick with you guys as an example don't end up being the best work. So I might end up going back in and redoing a version very similar, but taking my time and doing it slower. Let me get, like, I'm going to try to make these lines straighter so that there's variation from mountain to mountain. They don't all kind of blur together up here. Make my line a little thicker. So I'm trying to keep this line straight. If you're struggling to keep lines straight when you're making a straight line pattern, Remember, you can use the edge of anything, like sticky notes, packaging. I have some command strips laying here. I could use the edge of that to make straighter lines. You can be using your sketchbook paper for this. Just a reminder that if you're using a Sharpie, it will bleed through a couple pages. So if you want to stick something else in there, like a scrap piece of paper, something your parents were going to toss out with the mail anyways, would work well for that. Let's see. Okay. So you get a little bit better. It looked much straighter right here. This might get a redo eventually. Maybe I'll make this a second hit of the mountain so it looks more like it's staggered. Okay. So I'll go in and fill in these other ones. I'm going to go ahead and do some sky details first though. I really want there to be a sun in the middle. You don't have to do the same thing. You could put clouds. You could leave the sky sort of empty if you want. It's up to you. If the Sharpie is just way too thick for your liking, you can also use an ink pen. I'm not sure about your house, but I have like thousands of ink pens laying around my house. You could do much skinnier lines and more detailed line work if you were using like a ballpoint pen. So I'm going to do the sun. And then this one I think I'll just do broken lines. I want the sky to be lighter than the mountains. When I post this up with your assignment, I'm going to give you guys a few examples of different types of lines so that you don't get stuck with just like curvy zigzag castle, and that you have a wide variety. But you go in and start filling in. And you could use a pattern if you run out of things for like the sun rays. Maybe I'll repeat the same 3 again and again. Dotted. Okay. So I'll stop there. I'll put the finished project on here in just a second. I'll pause the video so you don't have to watch me do all the last bits. Let's see here. Okay, so here's the finished product. I went back and redid a couple that looked messier. So you can see this is a way of patching your work. Traced it and cut and glued over top of it. But it makes it look a little neater. But in the end, I have a landscape made completely using lines. Made up some different patterns: curved lines, dotted lines, wavy lines, castle lines, dashed lines, straight for this mountain up here in the top, just kind of curvy, random lines for this. And there we go. And it shows different line qualities because I have thin and thick. I have a few spots that are kind of sketchy, and then the other ones are really bold. But this is your first project with lawns.